we'll get started in just a minute or two here and see if this works. Except I'm the only one in. Good evening, everybody. As soon as make sure everything's running here, and then we can get started. If you wouldn't mind leaving your name in the chat window, just so I have an idea who's on, that would be helpful. Looks like we've got things going. So, welcome to the first try at Basin Beekeepers live stream with YouTube. Hopefully this is a good medium for everybody, and we can get have some discussion tonight. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window, and I will try and monitor those as we go through things tonight. I really just kind of want this to be an open chat, so if you have questions, if you have comments, leave them in the chat window, and I will try and get to them as we go along. Okay, some of the things that I thought we could talk about tonight, just to kind of get going, are some of the things that you can be doing with your hives this time of year. This is kind of the tricky time of the year for those that have made it through the winter with their bees. This last couple of months are the hardest to get through, and just kind of wanted to make sure everybody's got a chance to ask any questions that you've got, and we'll try and get to them as we go through. Okay, so one of the things that I was going to quickly talk about here is just some of the things that you can be doing with your bees to start off the year. So just some of the spring management things that we can be doing and should be doing if you've got bees and want to keep them healthy and alive. Those of you that kind of know me and have taken any of my classes, I kind of have 3 rules of beekeeping. One, there is no one right way to keep bees. What I say isn't always necessarily the gospel truth, and what works for me and what works for you is maybe 2 different things. And certainly as as you look at some of the other beekeepers and how they're doing things, the commercial beekeepers do things differently, and that's to be expected. My second rule is don't be content with what you know. So you need to be always learning with beekeeping. If you're not learning, the bees are going to surprise you. They don't read the books and they don't always do what they're supposed to. But if you watch them and you're in your hives and you're reading and you're looking for new information, that's a good thing. Be careful with some of the things that are out there. There's a lot of what I would call garbage out there on the internet, and information that just doesn't really work for keeping bees alive. And my last rule is all beekeeping is local. By that I mean what we do here in Utah and even what we do here in the Uintah Basin is different than what beekeepers on the Wasatch Front are doing, and certainly different than what beekeepers in the South or in California or in Canada. Where you're at makes a big difference, and there may be some big timing changes that are timing differences between even Roosevelt and Vernal, and certainly between Roosevelt and Tabiona, and we always seem to be about 3 weeks behind the Wasatch Front as far as plants and everything else. So if you try and do things at the same time frame as what some of the other beekeepers around are doing, if you do things the same as somebody in Georgia, you're going to have a hard time keeping bees. You have to adjust to your local area and the local climate, or you just don't keep bees very long. Okay, so I thought I'd quickly talk about if you're a brand new beekeeper, then there's a few things you need to be ready for. If you are, leave a comment in the chat window so I kind of know how many are brand new beekeepers, and I can kind of address some of those things if you've got questions that way. But the first thing that you've got to do is get your equipment ready, have a place ready for them to set up your hive, and have that all planned out. Get your equipment painted and have it ready to go. The second thing is you need to figure out how you're going to feed them, because you're going to need to feed those bees. So however you choose to do that, whether it's a bucket on top, whether it's an in-hive feeder, or whether it's a top feeder, have that feed method ready to go in your mind and how you're going to do that. So as soon as your bees come in, you need to get them installed in your hive as quickly as you can. If the weather's just really nasty when your bees come in, then they can hold for a day, maybe two in the package, or in a nook they're fine for a few days, but in a package you're going to want to get them into your hive as quickly as you can. If you've got a package and you install that package, you're going to want to check on that queen after 4 or 5 days. Make sure she's released out of her queen cage and she's starting to lay. If she's not released after 4 or 5 days, then you probably need to release her. Next is feed. You're going to feed them 1-to-1 sugar syrup, so 1 part sugar, 1 part water, and you're probably going to want to give them a pollen patty. They need that protein in order to raise brood, and with a package, they don't have enough foragers, they don't have enough population to really bring in the amount of pollen that they need to in order to raise brood. So you've got to help them along to begin with, especially with a package. With a nook, then they usually have a few more bees come with them, and they've got some stores ready, and they're a little easier to get going. And the next question all new beekeepers ask is, when do I add a second box? So don't add that second box until the bees have 7 to 8 frames that are all drawn out with comb and they're being used. Just having those frames that far along is important so that the bee population is high enough to get things going. If you add a box too soon, then it seems to slow them down. Bees kind of like to be a little bit, I don't know whether crowded is the right word, but cozy. They like to be cozy with each other, and they do better when they're just a little bit crowded. So as soon as you get 7 to 8 frames drawn and you've got bees on all those frames, then you can add another box. And that goes for the 3rd box and the 4th box and the 5th box if you get that far. Once you add a box and that new box has got 7 to 8 frames that are being used by the bees, then it's time to add another box. So that's kind of the quick and rundown for those that are brand new beekeepers. If you have any questions, let me know. If anybody's know if they're getting packages, do you know when they're coming in yet? I haven't really heard. Usually it's about the end of April when they come in. So let me know if you know when your packages are supposed to be coming in. For 2nd year hives, so those that have had bees and have made it through that 2nd year, this is the fun year with bees, because now you probably can have a little bit of a honey crop. So if you haven't done it already, get in there and clean off that bottom board. There's going to be a lot of debris on the bottom board, a little bit of wax. It's going to be some dead bees. Just pull off the top boxes and just scrape that bottom board. Get all that debris off of it. You need to evaluate whether you've got enough feed, enough resources for those bees. This is a real critical time of the year. There's pollen coming in right now. There's plenty of pollen out there, and I was out in my hives today, and the bees are bringing in pollen like crazy, but there's no nectar out there. So if they don't have any carbohydrates, if they don't have any honey left in the hive, then you probably need to be feeding them some sugar syrup. We're probably another week or 2 before we really start to get a little bit of nectar coming in. So watch that nectar resource for those hives. They need that carbohydrate. They need the pollen. If your hives made it through the winter well, you can probably sit and watch at the entrance of the hive and see pollen coming in by the next thing you need to be watching is your mite counts. If you treated last fall, that's a good thing. That's probably helped get your hive through the winter, is getting that mite count down. Hopefully your mite counts are really, really low right now. They need to be really low at the beginning of the year in order to kind of get through the summer. If they're high right now, now's a good time to get them treated. Hurry and get the treatments on and get them treated before we get into the real honey flow, because you don't want to be treating when the honey flow comes on. If you've got a weak hive, so what I consider a weak hive is 5 frames of bees or less. This time of year, if there's only 5 frames of bees, something's wrong. Do you have queen issues? Is there a disease? Is your mite counts too high? Do they not have the resources? Do they not have the pollen? Do they not have the honey to raise bees? So if they're less than 5 frames of bees coming out of winter, something's up. it's time to figure out what's going on and figure out whether it's just a queen. Is there a disease? Most likely they're short on resources. Bees are pretty good at gauging how many resources they have, and when they do that, they tend to scale back or scale their brood rearing accordingly. So if they're short on resources, they cut the queen back from laying. If they've got lots of resources, then they let that queen just go to town. So figure out why they're weak. If you've got a strong hive, and when I mean strong, I mean really strong, 10 frames of bees. If you open the box and you've got 2 deeps full of bees, or you've got 3 mediums full of bees, that's a strong hive, and that hive is probably in danger of swarming. We're just about to hit swarming season, so now's a good time to get in and do something about it. So you can split your hive. You sometimes just reversing the hive bodies. If the bottom box is empty, but then the top box is full of bees, you can reverse that top and bottom box, put the bottom one on the top one on the bottom. Sometimes that will help. The other thing you can do is checkerboarding. If you've never heard of checkerboarding, the idea is you break up the honey cap that's in the hive. So usually when bees raise brood, they have kind of a ball in the center of the hive. That's their brood nest, and above and around that ball they store their honey. And if that honey becomes too much, and they've got more honey than they can really deal with, then they start backfilling the brood nest with nectar. You probably are not going to see that yet, but as soon as we have a nectar flow going, and your hive is big, then what the bees start doing is they start backfilling that brood nest with nectar. That means the queen's got less room to lay. As she has less room to lay, they cut back her feeding, which skinnies her up, gets her ready to fly, and that process of swarming has already begun if they've already started doing that. And what you do with checkerboarding is you take the top frames and basically checkerboard them with a third box on top. And so you put a frame that's full of honey on the bottom, and right above it in the next box up you put an empty frame, and then you put an empty frame and a full frame and an empty frame, and above it you do just the opposite. So full, empty, full, empty, empty, full, empty, full, all the way across. That's the idea of checkerboarding. What that does is it breaks up that honey cap, and the bees feel like, oh, well, we have plenty of room to store honey, and they store honey up high, which gives them that room above the brood nest to store the honey. And as they do that, that keeps the queen laying, and that hive's less likely to swarm on you if you do that. So those are some of the things that I thought we could talk about. I could go over real quickly, and hopefully everybody's in one of those 2 camps. Either you're a brand new beekeeper, or you've made it through that first year. I can see a number of people on. If you'll leave your name and any questions in the chat window, I'll kind of go through questions now. I don't have a whole lot that I wanted to go through other than just kind of see where everybody was at and answer any questions that everybody might have. So I'll go ahead and open that up, and anybody that has any questions, I'll see if I can answer some of those. One of the questions that somebody had asked on the Basin Beekeepers web page was they left their honey super on as a feed box for winter, and that kept the bees alive, and they got through winter with that feed box, and that was a good thing. So, but now their queen has moved up into that honey super and has started laying in that honey super. So what they were asking, well, now what do I do? How do I get the queen out of there? The easiest thing to do is just go in and make sure that queen's not up in that honey super. If you have to shake the bees off and shake them down into the lower brood box, you can do that. And then put a queen excluder on, and then put your honey super back on. That way, any brood that she's laid up in that honey super, the queen excluder will keep her back down in the brood box, and any brood that's up in the honey super will hatch out and should be good to go after that. That's pretty common for queens to do that. Bees always like to build up as they're expanding, and if that honey super's on there, that's where they're going to go. I'm not seeing any questions. Anybody have any questions for me tonight? Somebody else was asking about having water for their bees. Generally speaking, if you've got a water source, a little stream or a little canal or ditch bank or something that's nearby, the bees will usually find water on their own, but sometimes they go to the neighbor's dog dish, and they can be a little bit annoying. So the easiest thing to do is provide water for them closer. Once bees kind of hone in on a water source, they don't, it's hard to get them to change their mind that there's a better water source somewhere else. But what you can do is use a chicken water. So one of those, just a plain chicken water that you fill with water, and the chickens, you tip it upside down, and it kind of creates a little bit of a vacuum in there so the water doesn't come out all at once. They usually have like a red base. If you fill that base up with some rocks and give those bees something to land on, then they don't drown as much. I haven't had a problem with watering bees around here. In my yards, there's usually something pretty close that they've found, either a little pond or the canal, the gulch, or something. Bees actually like water that's a little bit dirty. They don't do well with clear. They don't like the clear running water quite as well. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe there's some minerals or something they're picking up, but something that's like in a gulch or something, a pond, the pond edge is usually just enough. They like something about that muddy water that they like. So if you've got something nearby, then that's usually not a problem. But if not, then you may have to provide a water source for your bees. One of the other things you ought to be doing right now, especially if your bees made it through the winter, is you need to do a mite count. You need to understand where your mite loads are at and keep those mite loads under control. The mites weaken the bees' immune systems, and they are the vector for some of the diseases that the bees can get, especially deformed wing virus. And that one seems to really take its toll on a hive. Usually slow at first, and then just slowly the hive just never really thrives and takes off. So Make sure you know where your mite counts are. If you're not sure how to do a mite count, I can recommend a website. Let me see if I can hurry and find it here. This website is the Honeybee Health Coalition website. Let's see if I can show that to you. So this is the Honeybee Health Coalition website. If you go to How We Help Bees and then come down to Varroa Management, they have an excellent resources here for managing varroa mites. If you keep scrolling down, this sampling method, if you watch their little video, it'll show you how to take a mite sample and how to calculate your mite load. This is about the easiest way to do it. I prefer, they show both methods, either a sugar shake or an alcohol wash. I prefer the alcohol wash. It's more accurate. And then once you've got your mite load, then you can decide how you're going to treat, what you're going to do. And they go through all the major options that you have for treating your bees. This time of year, they have the formic acid works really well because it will kill the mites both on the bees, phoretic on the bees, and those that are in the cells with the larvae. Most of these others won't do that. So formic acid is one that will. Apivar, a lot of the commercial beekeepers use Apivar. Oxalic acid works rather well when there's no brood, but hopefully you've got brood this time of year, and the oxalic acid just doesn't work quite as well when there is brood because it only kills the mites that are on the bees themselves. Well, the mites reproduce in the cells with the larvae. That's where they spend most of their time, not on the bee. They only use the bee long enough to transport themselves from either from one hive to another or just around the hive a little bit. So oxalic acid is a great treatment. It's very natural, works well, but it works best when there's no brood in the hive. Some of the others, they talk about Apiguard, which is the thiamol oil base, and that one can work quite well too. Requeening can work if you're into requeening. I personally like to requeen all of my hives every year. And as I went through some of my hives this year, I found 2 queens that I've missed somewhere along the way, and just through my notes and that, I had to look back, and sure enough, I didn't requeen those for whatever reason, and those queens are actually 2 years old, and they are going great guns still. They've got big, massive hives. This time of year, I'll be adding honey supers just as soon as nectar starts to flow a little bit. I'll be adding honey supers to those hives. They're amazing hives. I run all medium hives, and these queens have got 3 mediums, which is really the equivalent of 2 deeps, and they're just packed full of bees. And so I had to go out and do some splits and a few things yesterday and today so that my hives didn't swarm on me. So not seeing any questions in the chat window. If you've got questions, go ahead and post them in the chat window, and I'll see what I can answer. This has been kind of interesting to go through and just get this up and running and working, and hopefully this is a medium that everybody likes, and if so, then I'll keep doing it and maybe do this once a month, and we can just get on and you can ask questions all you want. I think I can answer most questions. If I don't know the answer, then we'll see if we can find it from somebody else. Just looking through some of the things that I've like to talk about. Most of what I usually go through with my bee classes that I've done in the past. Hopefully you already know about everything, but let me I'm gonna switch over here to another screen, and hopefully I'm going to go through a couple of things here. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation that I've done. These are a couple of my hives, probably 2 years ago during the summer. You can see all the bearding on the front of the hives because they're hot. But you notice I've got 5 mediums here. So the first 3 are my brood chamber, and then the next 2 are honey supers. And I've had hives stacked as high as 8 mediums. So those are big booming hives. Here's a pretty cool picture of some pollen, side view, and you can see all the different pollens that have been packed into the cells. So for new beekeepers, if you're not familiar with what you're looking at when you get into your hive, this is a pretty typical. You're only seeing one little corner of the frame. Down in the bottom right is some sealed brood and varroa, because there's varroa mites under those cappings with the brood. And then you can see some open brood that hasn't been sealed yet. All this pearly white larvae, this is open brood. And then typically the bees will have what's called a feed ring right around the brood, and this is pollen that they've stored. You can see this bright yellow, and then this up here is a little bit darker. They've mixed this with some honey. This is actually bee bread now. So they mix it with they take the pollen and they mix it with a little bit of honey and a little bit of enzymes from glands in their jaws, and they mix that up and they make bee bread out of it. Bee bread is what they feed their larvae. So they like to keep this feed ring right around the brood nest, and then right above that pollen is honey, and this is capped honey up here that they've stored to feed the bees with. Here's a frame of drawn comb, brand new drawn comb. You can tell this is brand new because it's nice and white. If we went back to that previous screen, notice this comb is quite dark. Dark comb just means it's been there for a while, and the bees have walked over it and they've raised their brood in it several times. And the longer it stays in your hive, the darker it gets. And sometimes eventually it becomes almost black. And when it gets to be that point, it's probably time to cull that comb out and let them rebuild some fresh new comb. Wax is one of the things that can store it can build up some of the pesticides and the fungicides and the herbicides that the bees inadvertently bring in with the pollen. That pollen gets stored in the cells, and the wax absorbs some of that stuff. And over time, it can build up in the wax. It may take several years, but those chemicals can build up in the wax. So you want to be able to some say 3 years, some say 5 years. I think if you're culling out and kind of rotating your comb out every 5 years and letting them rebuild that comb, I think you're doing pretty good. So this is a nice new comb, brand new. And eventually this will become black. So here's a typical nook. If you're getting nooks this year, then you're going to transfer that nook from the nook box they come in into your normal hive. Just pick them up one frame at a time and put them in your boxes in the same orientation. So this was frame 1 in the nook box. This was frame 2. This is frame 3. You're going to want to keep them in the same orientation and the same order as you transfer them over. But nooks are really easy to do. Just transfer the frames over. Make sure you've filled out the rest of your box with empty frames. Put a lid on them, feed them, and you're good to go. Eventually you're going to get some propolis. That's this sticky stuff. We call it bee glue. The bees use this to kind of seal any nooks and cranny in the hive, and it's got some antimicrobial properties as well, and so it kind of acts as a defense system, an immune system for the hive, because it helps keep some of the microbes, some of the funguses, some of the bacteria and things at bay. Here's a good look at some pollen. This little bee up in the corner, I snapped that picture late September one year. I don't know where this little bee was finding this almost bright pink stuff, but she was bringing in bright pink late in the year. Where she found it, I don't know. But there's a nice quick close-up view of some pollen. Here's a couple of cool pictures. This is obviously a honeybee, and can't quite see all of her eyes. Most people don't know that bees have 5 eyes, so 2 compound eyes on the side. That's what everybody sees, but up here on top there's 1, 2, 3 simple eyes right here on the top. You can't see the 2 of them because of the hairs, but these eyes are what they use to help navigate in the dark. So in the hive, they use these 3 eyes to help navigate around in the dark. This kind of a lot of people ask why it hurts so bad to get stung. Well, that's the reason. This is an actual bee sting. You noticed it's barbed. The sting of the worker bee is a barbed shaft. If it's a queen bee, it's not barbed. It doesn't. Queen bees have a stinger, but they're not barbed like this. And really, there's 2 shafts here, and they each, on the other end of these, there's a muscle that moves these shafts up and down, and they kind of act like a saw as they penetrate your skin. And then this back piece right here just acts as a canal, kind of like a hypodermic needle, so that they can inject the venom in you. So if you get stung by a bee while you're working your bees, the best thing to do is just take your fingernail or your hive tool, and as quickly as you get stung, just scrape it out. Just scrape that stinger out as best you can. You're never going to get all of it. That's okay. Your body will take care of it, but the quicker you pull that stinger out, the less venom will get into you and you won't swell quite as much. Hopefully everybody knows the difference between drones and queens and workers. And as you get in your hives, hopefully everybody knows what they're looking at when they do. Everybody wants to see the queen, but if you're getting in your hive and you're seeing eggs, then that's all you need to be seeing. As long as you're seeing eggs, then you know you've had a queen in that hive in the last 3 days. You can usually rest assured that that queen's there and laying. So let me switch back here. Anybody have any questions? I really didn't have too much planned for today. Just thought I would introduce the live chat. If you like this format, leave me a comment, and I'll look at doing more of these in the future. And hopefully this is a good format while everybody's being quarantined, that we can still have a little bit of a discussion. And anybody else have any questions? Leave those in the live chat. Okay. Well, it's been fun tonight. Hopefully everybody had some questions answered and got to a little bit of background. If you have questions, go ahead and leave. You can leave them on the Basin Beekeepers website and on Facebook, and I will try and answer them as best I can and as quickly as I can. And I think we'll call that a night. Thanks everybody for joining me, and we'll do this again probably in about a month. Thanks. Have a good evening.